So this is my take on the Elderberry Blossoms face mask, showing with a adult small. Seems to be probably my most prevalent size. This one is in a cotton woven with a inner pocket layer that's slightly smaller to make it easier to get some kind of lining in or filter. The band is actually a yarn dyed stripe on this one and the example I'm going to be using, but I have used yarn dyed stripes, cotton lycra, spandex, bamboo blend, rayon blend, tencel blend, modal blend with lycra spandex. And just as long as you're aware of how much stretch they have, which direction the stretch goes, and if you're going against the direction with the most stretch, like this, then you just test to see how much stretch it is and how much you think you'll need. Try it on yourself. That's the best way. Most head sizes aren't too different, so if you're comfortable with the stretch it has around your head, you should be fine for someone else, unless there's something else going on that you need specialty for, but then you should have a measurement anyway. I cut all of my patterns with a rotary cutter. I do cut the bands at 1.5, maybe slightly larger. It's hard to tell on these because they do have a roll because I've cut against the grain. But, and I believe these are about 34 inches because that's as long as my fabric was. Didn't feel like trimming them. It's nice to give people extra if you can. So I'll start. This is the main pattern piece, and I've adapted my liner pattern piece. Very simply, it's 3/4 of an inch shorter than the main pattern piece. Lay them on top of each other. Here. And show you. That's 3/4 of an inch short, and what I've done here is added, so when I serge and then fold and fold again, it matches up here. Now sometimes it's a little bigger, a little smaller, but that way when I'm sewing the band on, it catches, and I don't have a small raw piece going down in the opposite direction. So this is what I've adapted. I can do another video explaining that if you need it. So I have my outer piece, which is a fun, funky black and white. My inner piece, sometimes I cut them out of the same cotton woven, but I'm trying to make them as light as possible for summer. So this is a muslin 100% cotton. Everything's pre-washed. And then here's my pocket lining piece. Generally, throughout the whole process, I use one pin. I do use my iron, I use my serger and my regular sewing machine, and I will take you to those steps next. Alright, I'm going to start, I always start with the little pocket piece. And what I do, I've cut it mirrored, so right side is out and this right side is out. So take them apart and make sure that the right sides are facing up. Just split them. And then however it needs to go, however you want it. I just sew them the same way, so when I fold them at the iron, that I'm folding in the same direction. It doesn't matter which direction is up, but it just matters which direction you fold so that your cuts are even and they match up nicely. It doesn't matter how precise you are, it'll always come out a little different on top and bottom. So I cut right at the blade. I always have my blade on, but I don't trim any. It just catches any loose threads that might be coming off. Keep it nice and clean. And rather than trimming between, I usually just sew both, or however many I have. both the same way up. So when you flip them back to be right sides together, the cuts will be the same. So then we move to the iron. Okay, I'm at the ironing board and I've got the same side of the pocket piece facing up. I'm going to split them, iron them flat. I'm going to fold over, iron, and fold over again. I will video this the best I can for you. Okay, so here we go. And I have my iron on a cotton setting. You can fold straight to the low part of your cut to make sure it's even. You don't need steam. You can use steam, doesn't really matter. If you catch, straighten it out, fold again. And one more quick iron. Here we go. All right, one more piece. I find that if I iron it first before folding, it tends to stay a little while I'm picking my iron back up. Okay, one more time. All right, now move back to the regular sewing machine. Okay, at the sewing machine we've got our pocket piece that's serged, folded once, folded twice, and we're going to go to the finished side. This is what I do. You can do it once, you can do it twice, you can zigzag, whichever you like. I've set it, let's see if I can get a good close-up. Set it here, excuse the dust. So it's 1/8 inch from here to here. So down once and come back and do another 1/8 over from that, just to keep it nice and flat, and so it doesn't tempt to roll back out from under when it is worn or you put a lining piece in. Let's see if we can focus again. No, we're not going to stay put. Here we go. There we go. Let's hope I don't knock it. That'll catch in your serging when you're attaching the trim. So there's really no need to back stitch at the end. There's my second line. That's just personal preference. If you like, use a wide zigzag, anything. It may be hard to see, but you've got your 2 lines. And that just catches that nicely and prevents it from wanting to flip back over once it's part of the mask. So we've got one done. Repeat that exact same thing with the second side. Like I said, I've done one at 1/8 and then I'm doing a second, an eighth from that, so this will be at a quarter. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. We've got our 2 pieces finished. I'm going to flip them over. We know these were cut the same side. So this is a point where you can take all your little ends. If your pocket edges are wider and overlapping here, I'm going to have to go here. You can trim them off too. I'm going to go ahead and trim all my loose threads at once. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it helps to have them out of the way. There we go. Got a little one back here. This is the other side, and see on this one, you can see my pocket came out a little bit taller. So I'm going to trim that off, make it nice and even. And you should still fall within the serger and 1 loose thread. Okay. So now I've got my pieces lined up. They match because this was the same cut because of the way we've organized and put them together. So I'm going to go here, back to my machine. And just sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the curve. So there you have that. And there we go. So I'm gonna trim our threads. That's fun. Now it might be hard to see, but you've got your finished stitch here, and what I like to do is cut straight across. Not cutting the finished stitch. This is the, so we're cutting just straight across above the finished stitch. I find this is easier to put the lining on. And I will put that aside and we will start on the outer. This is starting the outer fabric. I've got my outer print, and then my second, or my first lining, not the pocket, this would be the lining, that's cut in the exact same shape. Now these are right sides out, and I need to put everything right sides together in order. So I'm gonna open up my print and put right sides together. I want print on print, and then the same with my lining. I'm going to open them up and flip them back together. So I've got print on print and lining right side to lining right side. And it doesn't matter which way you do that. I've got these right sides together and this right sides together. I'm going to lay my outer on top of my lining. Now, if it doesn't match up, you may want to flip it over. And what I'm saying is go top to bottom. Sometimes when we cut, remember these have been cut at different times, and cut with a rotary cutter, you may have a little disparity. You may have a little bit different. These aren't absolutely exact, but they're very close. The other way up, they didn't quite match, and I had one curving up here. It's just natural, and you will seem to cut that way, especially if you're cutting with a rotary cutter. But once you have them lined up, and this is your top, let's say, it doesn't matter if you sew this way or this way, as long as you keep your groups together, lining and lining, outer and outer. So I'm going to sew this way just because it's the way I have it now. And make sure the edges are fairly close, and I just hold it. The fabric sticks together fairly well. It's a similar shape. It's not a long course to sew. And you can always adjust it a little at the bottom. That's what I'm doing. Make sure it fits, but it's a lot quicker than pinning the whole thing. So we can see here we've got our nice sewn line. We trim our threads, put it down to do that. And I will show you again the cutting straight across. You point up, and this will be, it'll be perpendicular to your end, the side part of the face mask. I'm going to cut right here, but I'm not going to cut through the stitching. I'm just going to cut here. Well, it'd be good if I was using my good scissors. And I find it makes it easier to attach the binding. Okay, so what I'm going to do on both my pocket piece and my outer plus lining is I'm going to trim them mostly in the center, and I'll show you what I mean. I need a little bit of this fabric on the seam to pin it, keep it in place, and also know which direction it's going. But I find if you leave this, it's hard to turn, it bunches, and it makes it quite thick. So I'll show you on both. I'll hold it down here so hopefully you can see. I'm going to start about an inch, inch and a half from the bottom. I'm trimmed to about 1/8 of an inch. You don't need to go too close, but you're just trying to reduce some of that bulk. And then I'm going to come back out about 1 inch from the end. That gives me this to pin with. Okay, I do the same thing here. You really want to start where that deep curve is. Clipping a curve is the easiest way to make it turn and not bunch. And come straight out of it. All right. There we go. So, we've got that. Now what you have, pull your lining apart and your outer apart. You have this nice seamless pocket lining. So we're going to jump on the serger next. Okay, moved over 1 foot to show you serging. So I've just shown you. We've just sewn this and turned it. And this is basically what the mask looks like. You all know that? Right. But it does have some shape now that you've got that seam sewn. So what you want to do is take one end and pull it apart and tuck this end. You can keep them together. Put this together, tuck that end in. And then you will have the ends that had been touching right sides together again. I'm going to do it one more time because it is a little confusing sometimes. So put the mask as it would be when it's finished. Okay, your right side, doesn't matter which side is up. You're going to pull apart these ends that sit together. Just pick one side, pull these apart, tuck the rest of the mask in, put those sides right side together. I'm going to serge these. Okay, so we've serged those. Don't need quite that much on the end. You can leave some tails because they will come off again when we put the bands on, and that way you have them nice and secure. So I've done that. just reach inside. You're going to pop the mask back out. So this is the side we have just sewn, and this is the side that's open. So now we're going to take the side that's open, do the same thing. We're going to split it apart and tuck the rest in. There you go. And we've got right sides together. Line them up and serge them. Doesn't matter which fabric is on top or which direction you go. There we go, and we will pop this back out. Okay, and you've got that side finished and this side finished. I'm going to roll them and pop over to my iron. Okay, we have just closed the ends of the outer mask. Just going to roll them and iron the end. We can go right up into the curve on one side and roll the end. This helps keep everything in place when you go to attach the bands and then top stitch. So we've got our nice ends. And if you need to, this one's puckering just a little. I'm going to give this seam a little press on both sides. Keep that seam open. There we go. Back to the sewing machine. Okay, now we're going to talk about bands. Attaching them is very simple. You can do it a lot of different ways. I'm kind of picky, so this is the way I do it to make sure that it's right. I had a couple mishaps going straight to the serger, so that's why I do it the way I do it. So you take your mask. I like to do mask right side out, and then I go ahead and put my pocket right side down. That way I know I'm right. Fold back the pocket. I've got my mask there. You may have a little V, but it's a little bit straighter. You can always straighten that out. I don't mind to take a little off if I need to. Make that nice and straight. It's so much easier to put the band on when you've got a straight edge. Now when you take your band, don't forget, it's so hard in sewing, but your band will be wrong sides together. You always want to look at the pretty part of the band. Look at the nice part, the part that everybody's going to see. You want to see what you see at the end. All right, so fold that and just hold it up. Find the center. Don't have enough room to do it on camera, but give me a second while I find close to the center. I've decided on this to make sure a white stripe actually goes in the middle. So I line that up with my center. Now I can feel with my finger, but I will show you as well, that all of that seam allowance from my original seam gets pushed to this side. So it is on my right side. So all that bulk is on my right. And I leave it there so I can feel it and make sure that it stays over to the right. So what I will want to do when I pull my pocket piece up is make sure that goes to the left. And because you have a little bit to hold on to, you can feel where that center seam is, and you can feel that it's lined up if you kind of push those two bulks of fabric together. And that's that simple. So then I go with my one pin. I put it through Make sure I catch the bulk. And here too. That's all I do. Now, you could have just gone to your sewing machine, maybe pinned this first, gone to the serger and serged the whole thing. But I'm super picky about having it lined up, and I've missed on a couple of occasions, so I do this just to make sure, and it gives it a really strong strong hold. I don't baste because I don't like to change the settings on my sewing machine, so I just have it on my normal 2.5 stitch in the middle. This is about 1/8 of an inch, just to make sure it's within the serging lines, because I am going to go over and serge this to finish the bands all the way to their ends. So you can see I'm starting in the middle. You can start a little before the center seam, it doesn't matter. I put the needle down, I take 1 stitch, and I go ahead and just pull that pin right out. Done with it for now until the next mask, and just put it aside. So because these are curved and you want them to fit to the face, I do pull my bands. So I want to pull this band moderately. You don't want to pull it super hard. Pull it just a nice stretch. Now, something to think about is your pocket and your main piece of lining and outer will stretch a little if you pull on them when you sew, which is fine. You just want to make sure that the band is stretched more. These are curved and a little angled, so they have a bit of bias and they will stretch. That's fine. One thing you want to pay attention to is when you're finishing the other side, that your pocket is somewhat even. It doesn't have to be perfect, but realize that you are going to have some stretch on both the outer and your pocket. So I like to hold it, stretch it a little, line it up about halfway, and just go ahead, give it a little sew, stop, slow down, readjust. Now there's a bit of a curve. The pattern goes like this, so realize that when you're sewing and go ahead and kind of curve everything. Like I said, we've made this so it will get caught up when we sew and serge, so we're just gonna hold that all down. There you go. You don't really need to backstitch. You're going to serge over this. It's just a placeholder. It's really just basting, and you can baste. Now, if you've missed part of it, which I have, that's why I do this. I'm going to go back and just catch that. I'm going to sew a little deeper. It's hard when you're trying to watch what you're doing through a camera. So that's just going to catch that. But it's so close to the top that the serger will definitely catch that. Now I've caught that fabric underneath too. So you want to go to the other side, make sure everything's lined up and you haven't got anything caught, and you're going to start again right about the center seam. And you don't really need to backstitch since you're sewing over yourself. And again, this is about 1/8 of an inch. You can go a little more if you want. It'd be hard to go much less. So go ahead and lay everything flat, pull your band, go about halfway. Now see, if you pulled your band straight, you'd be down here. So if you kind of pull, hold, and turn, use a couple fingers, you're good. We're gonna turn. There you go. So yes, it takes a little extra time. It's 2 extra steps rather than just serging start to finish and stretching. But I feel like the stretch that I get, I'm going to catch that again, is a little more even. And if I've missed a spot, if I have trouble catching somewhere, I can make sure it's caught and doesn't get folded over when I go over to my serger. So that's one side. You can stop here and skip to the next step or you can watch me do the other side. So finding my center of my bands, right sides together, and I already said I'm putting the white on the center seam on both, just so it's even. Now if you had the bulk on the right side, this time it will be on the left side. It's always going to be that way. It's always going to be opposite when you go to work on the opposite side. Always sew pocket side up where you can see what you're doing. You want to make sure to catch that bulk that's inside. And I always tend to go and sew to the right first, and then I come back and sew to the left. You do what's most comfortable for you. Okay, so put it in, put my needle down, give it one stitch to hold, take my needle out, and that's it with pinning. Give it a little line up, put it back under the needle, get it started, and make sure that it's a bit lined up. My lining was a bit short there. Make sure you get that curve, and then go to the end. That's finished. These are basted on. Now we're going to go to the serger and attach them from start to finish all the way through the other end. Okay, onto the serger. I have attached, basically just basted. You could use a basting stitch, anything you want. The bands on here, and you can see they've pulled the fabric in a little, which is exactly what you want. Exactly. So the fabric doesn't have stretch, well, a little on the bias, but the woven isn't stretchy, but it does give it a chance for a nice fit. So the way I like to sew it, start from here, make sure that you've got your band folded the same way all the way to the end, because if you don't, you'll be upset when you have to unpick it. So again, wrong sides together, so you're looking at the pretty side of the band. You always want to look at the pretty side. I just used a blunt end. You can fold in the end after you finish serging and top stitch with a sewing machine for a nice finished look at the end. I just tie the threads in a knot because my regular sewing machine absolutely hates knits, and I feel like that's the neatest finish for me. So starting at an end, again, when I serge for this project, I put it up against the knife. If I notice that it's extra wide, I will trim a little off. I feel like the knife is just there to make things nice and neat and even. I do want to make sure I have enough to tie at the end. So I'm gonna give myself a little extra tail. And here we go. Do not pull while you're serging the loose part of the band. And I'll explain what you do when you get to the mask. So we're gonna serge the loose part. This is a bit tricky because it rolls, but you can always pin it if it's rolling a lot on you. Okay, don't pull, but I'm right here to the edge of the mask. I haven't sewn the mask yet, but I'll be there in a second. So when I get to the mask, what I do is I'm not pulling the fabric. I'm going to switch this just a little to stretch it. I'm not bearing down on it. I'm pulling the fabric just so that it's straight, which will stretch your band inside, but because the band is pulling the fabric back, I just want to pull it so it's nice and flat and give it a chance to serge that way. So you'll see what that looks like. I'm not pulling it back or trying to give any extra stitches, just make it straight. Another thing you might want to do is reach underneath with your fingers and make sure that your mask isn't bunched. I'm going to make it straight and make sure you have no extra fabric. And don't forget, your mask is shaped like this. So when you're sewing, you're not going to be able to go in a straight line. You do need to sew with the curve. It's very subtle, but you do need to keep an eye on it. And again, here I'm almost off the end of the mask. It's still onto the mask. I'm not pulling, I'm just lining this up so I can come off the mask without having to pull. Now you're on the loose part of the band, and you'll just sew all the way to the end. I'm going to give myself extra to start the next band and to be able to tie this off. Let's see, we have it finished here. Still got some stretch, but a nice finish. It's caught everything, all the layers, all the bands. All right, so we're going to do the next one. It's exactly the same thing if you want to skip to the next step. So I do turn it over, make sure the pocket is up. I find it's the easiest way to make sure that these don't get pushed over and that you catch this in the right direction. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Band wrong sides together. And we're going to sew all the way down to the mask before we just make sure that that woven fabric is nice and straight, not stretched or bunched, just nice and straight. Some loose threads. I'm just going to make sure those get cut off if I can. There we go. Making sure my woven fabric is nice and straight. Little trick for the ends. You can finish these however you like. My favorite for this project is just a simple knot. Hold it over here so you can see. Not a slip knot, a full knot all the way through, all the threads. Pull it back down right against your fabric as close as you can get. I've got that tiny knot there. You see it against the knots right there. Give about 1/8 of an inch. Cut the end. Now, if you have a sewing machine that loves knits, you can turn this in and give it a nice finish. You can always use a turning tool, not open scissors. Closed scissors will work. So you can always fold it in, just sew it, but I'm not going to show you that. Your choice on how to finish those. The little tiny knot, it should tighten it up. It should be fine. All right, we're going to finish the 4 of these. Then we are going to go to the iron. You don't have to iron. I don't always iron on this next step. And see, I've missed. I put the knot way up here. So I'm going to do it again. There we go. The knot's right next to the fabric. Right there. Okay. 2 more and then I will show you a quick ironing process to make the top stitching easier. Okay, we've serged the bands. Yay, tied the ends. We have our inside out mask. So we're going to birth our mask. Reach inside the pocket or push all the way through. Pull your bands. 1 and 2. There's your mask. So take some time, give it a little shape, pull the pocket and the outer and the lining away from your bands, and that will start to give it the shape. You can push up and out around the curve where it would go out from your nose. Got those nice ends that, remember, you serged together earlier. You've got your pocket. All right. So here's the outside. Here's the inside. Okay. So first things first, nice and easy just to give the curve. And I like to do it in halves. If you have a tailor's ham or a sleeve press, you might be able to do it on something curved. But I find it easier just to do it in half. This is a good way as well. Your seams should be thick enough that you should be able to keep your iron off your bands if you need. Some poly blends, you'll need to keep the iron off here. Or if you're not sure and you're worried about it, iron on a low heat. This doesn't have to be a super professional iron. It's just making it easier for you to top stitch. Something you do want to do, I'll move this over a little bit. Right here where your band and the outer meet for the very first time, you may want to overturn it. Don't pull it back really hard from the band. Make sure you've got enough space to stitch nicely there. And the same thing on the other side. Give yourself a little room to overstitch. So just take that, come up, and you'll see the iron sits a little over. And feel from the outside and the inside that you've got that seam pushed towards the mask, not pushed towards the band. Flip it over. And make sure that seam is pushed towards the mask and not the band. Back at the sewing machine. Still haven't changed any of my settings. And we're just going to give this some finishing touches. So what we are going to do is top stitch. I like to say between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. You do want to try and catch your serging on the inside. Now nobody's going to see that, but that will give it strength and also really flatten this seam. Because it's serged, it does bubble because it's quite a bit of fabric that's serged together in there. But this will definitely help flatten that out and give the mask a nice finished look. It will help it stand up to washings. And don't forget, we regular stitched, but we basted the band on, then we serged it, now we're top stitching it. That band's never going anywhere. So you can be confident in that. So we are going to stitch, if you can see the whole mask, I'm gonna come out for a little bit. We're gonna start in one corner. It doesn't really matter where you start because we're gonna go all the way around. Go up and around, down, all the way back to here. Now something to remember, like when we're serging, the mask isn't straight. It looks straight here, but you can't just sew straight. The mask curves. When you're holding it, the woven curves this way, curves this way, and then it will curve back that way on the bottom half. So you need to be aware of what the woven is doing. Don't worry so much about this. Just don't catch it in your top stitching. Pull the woven straight as it is cut. Don't pull it in a straight line. Pull it as it is cut. So I'm going to come on top of this and see if it makes sense as to what I'm saying. So here, this would be sewing in a straight line. You don't want to pull the fabric this way. It's going to skew it. You do want to sew directionally. I'm going to show you. I'm going to sew in this direction. I'm coming this way, just like I would with something shaped like that. And then when you get to this part, it's not straight either. It is shaped this way. And that's the curve of the woven, not the curve of the knit fabric. So let's get started, and we're just going to go all the way around. The seam is quite thick, so sometimes you might need a run up, but make sure you pull back from the band, and make sure you got a hold on the band too. You don't want to get that caught in your sewing. I'm just sewing with a universal needle. You don't need heavy duty or anything crazy. But you do see how you do need to sew directionally as you're sewing this. If you pull it straight, it's going to warp the mask. You need to sew in the shape of the mask. Now I've turned at the corner, lift up the presser foot and turn. Because this is so much thicker than the band and the back of your foot doesn't have a lot to hold on to, you can put a folded up piece of fabric here, or you can give it a slight pull, just to make sure that it's going in the right direction. Again, I'm sewing this at about 1/8 of an inch. And again, we're coming to the corner of the mask right here. You want to make sure your band is folded under nicely, and you've got plenty of room to grip that band when you turn the corner. If you're pulling back like this, when you get to this corner, you may not catch the band. Again, so here, I'm going to make sure, and just use your thumb, just feel it before you get there. I'm going to make sure that that's turned under, facing the right direction. There you go. So let's go to the corner. And do our 90-degree turn again. Set this back up so I can finish sewing. Again, just shape it so I can see where to sew, and so it keeps its shape. You may notice loose threads, that's fine. That's actually one we've just picked up. Making sure to pull back that center seam. Last 90-degree turn. A little pull to get it going. That is a thick seam. So come back to where you've started. Backstitch. Oh, cut it twice if you want, like me. Going to trim. I would spend some time trimming the seams or trimming the threads, but you don't need to see that. So pull this back. There's our completed mask. And yes, your bands will pull in a little underneath. That's nice. It gives it a great fit. When your wearer or yourself go to wear it. That's all she wrote. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Just want to give a shout out to Kimberly, who gave the pattern from Eldenberry Blossoms. It's a free pattern. Go to the Eldenberry Blossoms Facebook page, group, and you can find the pattern there. There are tons of tutorials, tons of hacks, tons of different versions. And while you're there, visit her webpage. She has great patterns. I've tested for her. She's a wonderful person. And through all this, you know, support small business, shop small. Go and see what she's got. Go check out some of her patterns. She really does have some great ones. The Bloomin' Breeches, one of my favorites. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I will do a tutorial on cutting the pattern for the pocket. And I will also do a tutorial on serging the bands straight away and show you what that looks like, so you can cut to that step and not baste them or prime them on your regular sewing machine if you do want to save time. Thanks everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video.